When I first saw the listing for the old mountain house, I thought it was just another forgotten property sitting quietly in the woods. The photos showed cracked windows, peeling paint, and a porch that looked like it was holding on by sheer luck. But something about it pulled me in. Maybe it was the way the tall pines framed it, or how the mountains in the distance made it look small yet safe. I bought it on impulse, figuring I could fix it up little by little, turn it into a weekend getaway, and maybe one day pass it down. It was supposed to be my escape, my little slice of peace away from the noise of everything else. But what I didn't know was that this house was hiding more than broken beams and rotting floorboards. The first time I drove up there, the road was so quiet it felt like I was the only one for miles. The air was thin, crisp, the kind that makes you breathe deeper just to feel it in your lungs. I pulled up to the house expecting silence, expecting dust and echoes. And for a moment, that's exactly what I found. The house creaked as if it had been waiting for someone to step inside again. I remember running my hand along the old wooden railing, imagining all the work ahead, scrubbing, painting, hauling out junk. It felt like a project, not a problem. But a project can turn into something very different once people get involved. I left that weekend with a list of supplies and a heart full of plans. I was already picturing new windows, a restored porch, maybe even a fire pit outside for winter nights. I thought about how good it would feel to bring something back to life. But when I returned just a couple of weeks later, the whole atmosphere had shifted. From the driveway, I noticed something strange. The curtains were drawn. Curtains I hadn't touched. At first, I thought maybe the wind had blown something inside, or maybe the weight of the fabric had shifted. But as I walked closer, I could hear faint noises, the unmistakable sound of someone moving around inside. I froze. Nobody was supposed to be there. I owned the deed. I held the keys. And yet it felt like I was stepping into someone else's space. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just an animal. Still, the sound of footsteps is something you can't mistake. My heart was pounding when I turned the handle and pushed the door open. And that's when I saw her. A woman stood in the living room like she had been waiting for me. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't scrambling to explain herself. She looked at me with the kind of confidence that makes you question if you're the one in the wrong. She had made herself at home in what was supposed to be my abandoned house. A blanket draped over the couch, a mug sitting on the counter, even a small lamp casting a warm glow over the room that should have been cold and empty. I managed to get out the words, "Who are you?" But she cut me off before I could finish. She said she was part of the neighborhood's HOA, and that she was keeping an eye on the place. Except it didn't look like she was just keeping an eye. It looked like she had moved in. And then, as if the whole thing made sense, she introduced herself with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was the kind of person people whisper about in neighborhoods, the one who knows every rule, every technicality, and every way to make you feel like you're breaking them. From that moment on, the project I thought was going to be about wood and nails turned into something entirely different. It wasn't about renovation anymore. It was about figuring out why this woman was inside my home, why she acted like she belonged there, and what it would take to get her out. The more she spoke, the more unsettling it became. She talked about protecting community standards and how I hadn't filed any proper notices. I hadn't even known there was an HOA this far into the mountains, let alone one that thought they could move in and take over someone else's property. I remember standing there, trying to process it all while my mind spun in a dozen directions. Was she serious? Was she bluffing? Did she actually think she had the right to stay here? The strangest part was how calm she was. No guilt, no shame, just certainty. She had already laid down her things, as if she was setting roots, as if my house had somehow become hers. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't going to be a simple fix. The tension between us hung heavy in that small, dimly lit room. Part of me wanted to shout, demand answers, call someone right then and there. But another part of me knew I needed to tread carefully. There was something unpredictable about her, like she had already played this game before and I was just catching up. I looked around at the place I had dreamed of restoring, the cracked walls, the sagging ceiling, the way the mountain light used to spill through the windows before she covered them. This was supposed to be my refuge, not a battleground. Yet here we were, two strangers locked in a silent contest over who truly belonged. And as she stood there smiling, like she had all the time in the world. I realized this story was only just beginning, because what I uncovered after that moment, what I learned about her and about this so-called HOA, turned a simple renovation into a fight I never saw coming. And the truth is, by the end of it, the mountain house wasn't the only thing that needed fixing. But that part of the story. Well, you'll want to hear what happened next. I didn't move right away. I just stood there in the doorway, trying to piece together how my abandoned mountain house, the one I had dreamed of restoring, now had someone else claiming space inside it. The air in the room felt heavy, the kind of weight that presses down on your chest. She watched me, calm as ever, with that strange smile like she already knew how this was going to play out. I didn't even know her name yet, but I could feel she wasn't just going to pack up and leave. When she finally introduced herself, she said her name like it was supposed to mean something. She added that she was a representative of the Homeowners Association. I remember thinking that sounded odd. How could there even be an HOA in the middle of nowhere? The house was on the edge of the forest, tucked away on its own plot of land. No paved streets, no manicured lawns, no pool or clubhouse. Just trees, silence, and this weather-beaten house. The idea of an HOA here didn't make sense, but the way she spoke, you'd think she was the mayor of the mountain. She walked around the room with a kind of confidence I couldn't ignore, pointing out things she claimed needed to be addressed before renovations could begin. Cracked window frames, loose floorboards, an overgrown yard. She said it all like she had authority over me, over my property. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't here by accident. She had been watching this house long before I bought it, maybe even treating it as her own. The mug on the counter, the blanket on the couch. It wasn't just her dropping by to check on things. She had been living here, making herself comfortable, maybe for weeks or even months. I tried to ask her how long she had been staying, but she deflected. She shifted the conversation back to rules, policies, community expectations. The way she spoke, it was like she had rehearsed every word. And the more she talked, the more I realized she was skilled at twisting the situation. Somehow, she had convinced herself, or maybe tried to convince me, that I was the one intruding, not her. I left that first encounter unsettled. I told myself I needed time to think before deciding my next step. I got back in my truck, drove down the mountain road, and couldn't shake the image of her standing there in my living room. The mountain house was supposed to be a blank slate for me, a place to rebuild. Instead, it already had its own story, one that I hadn't signed up for. Over the next few days, I started digging into the property's history. I pulled up old records, asked around in town, even visited the county office. That's when I found out the mountain wasn't as isolated as it looked. Years back, a small group of cabins and houses had been built in the area. Over time, most of them were abandoned or sold off, leaving just a handful still standing. But apparently, an HOA had been formed during those years, meant to protect community interests and maintain property values. On paper, it sounded harmless, but in practice, it was a way for a few people to hold control. The deeper I looked, the more her presence made sense, at least to her. She wasn't just squatting. She believed she had authority here, backed by rules nobody else cared about anymore. But the strangest part was how little evidence I could find of this HOA actually existing now. No board meetings, no updated filings, no official contact information, just scraps of paperwork from years ago, and yet she had latched onto it like a lifeline. I couldn't help but wonder what she really wanted. If it was about rules, why move into my house? If it was about protecting the neighborhood, why target me? Something didn't add up. Maybe she had been alone on this mountain for too long. Maybe she was clinging to a sense of power in a place where power didn't matter anymore. Or maybe she knew something about this house, something I hadn't uncovered yet. The next time I went back up the mountain, I half expected her to be gone. But when I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was smoke rising from the chimney. She had made herself at home even more than before. Inside, the house looked different, tidier, almost lived in. The couch cushions had been fluffed, a rug I didn't recognize lay across the floor, and the smell of coffee lingered in the air. It was like she was trying to erase the abandoned feel of the place and replace it with her own version of home. When she saw me, she greeted me casually, as if I were a guest instead of the owner. She talked about our community and our standards, dropping phrases that made my blood boil. I tried to reason with her, pointing out that I had bought the house legally, that I had plans to renovate. But she brushed it off, saying I needed her approval before doing anything major. Approval from someone who wasn't even supposed to be there. I couldn't figure out what her endgame was. Was she waiting for me to give up, to walk away so she could claim the house as her own? Or was this just her way of testing me, seeing how far I'd let her push? Every time she spoke, it felt like there was something she wasn't saying out loud, something lurking beneath her polished words. And then came the strangest part. She mentioned that she had kept things safe in the house for years, like it was her personal duty. She hinted that she knew more about the property's past than I did, even about the people who had lived there before me. I wanted to press her for answers, but the way she looked at me made me stop. It was a look that said she held secrets, and that she would reveal them only when it suited her. The mystery of the mountain house grew heavier with every visit. I started noticing little things I couldn't explain. A door left open when I knew I had shut it. Items moved around, small but noticeable. Once, I found an old photograph tucked inside a drawer showing the house in its better days, with people standing on the porch. I didn't recognize any of them, but something about the photo gave me chills. When I asked her about it, she claimed she had found it too, but the way she avoided my eyes told me otherwise. At night, I'd lie awake thinking about it all. The house, the history, the HOA that barely existed, and this woman who seemed determined to stay no matter what. I kept circling back to the same question. Why here? Out of all the places she could be, why this house, my house? The more I tried to push her out, the more she dug in. And each time I drove up the mountain, I felt like I was stepping deeper into a story I didn't fully understand. The house wasn't just abandoned. It was holding on to pieces of the past, pieces that someone like her wasn't willing to let go of. And the strangest part was, I could feel that I hadn't even uncovered the biggest secret yet. Something was waiting in those walls, in the land, in the way she lingered like she belonged. And I had a feeling that before long, I was going to find out exactly what it was, whether I wanted to or not. The days after my second trip to the mountain house were filled with questions I couldn't shake. I kept replaying the moments in my head, her calm voice, her certainty, the way she looked at me like I was the intruder. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like she wasn't just some neighbor clinging to rules. There was purpose behind her presence, something calculated. She had stepped into the abandoned mountain house long before I showed up with dreams of fixing it. And now she had no intention of leaving. I decided to dig deeper, not just into the property records, but into the people who lived nearby. I drove through the winding roads that curved around the mountain, stopping at the scattered homes still occupied. Most of them were small cabins, weathered by snow and rain, but alive with signs of people who had stayed when others left. At the first place I visited, an older man named Frank answered the door. He was suspicious at first, but once I mentioned the house, his eyes lit up with recognition. "That place?" he said. "You bought it?" Thought no one would ever take that one back. I asked him what he meant, and he leaned against the doorframe, lowering his voice. He told me the house had a strange history. Families moved in, stayed a while, then left without explanation. Sometimes they just sold quickly. Other times they simply disappeared, leaving the place to fall apart again. Nobody in town talked much about it, but everyone noticed. It was as if the house never wanted anyone to stay. When I mentioned the woman inside, he nodded slowly, like he wasn't surprised. "That's Karen," he said. "She's been around longer than most. Claims she runs the HOA, but far as I know, there hasn't been an HOA here in years. Still, she makes it her business to know who's coming and going. Thinks she owns the mountain." The way he said it unsettled me. If others knew about her, then maybe this wasn't some strange coincidence. Maybe she had been waiting for the house to fall into someone else's hands, just so she could wedge herself into the story again. As I left Frank's place, I couldn't stop wondering what her connection to the house really was. Did she once live there? Was she holding onto some claim from the past? Or was it all just a power game to her? Either way, the conflict was clear. She believed she had authority, and I believed I had the deed. Two truths clashing in the middle of the mountains. Next time I went up to the house, I decided to test her. Instead of confronting her directly, I started unloading supplies from my truck: paint, tools, a ladder. I wanted to see how she would react when she realized I was moving forward with my plans. Sure enough, she appeared at the doorway before I had even finished stacking the boxes. "You can't just start work," she said firmly. "There are approvals processes. I need to review everything." Her voice carried the tone of finality, but I ignored it. I kept moving my supplies, setting them against the porch. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable, until she finally stepped closer. That's when she said something that caught me off guard. "This house has rules, and if you don't follow them, the house won't let you stay." I paused, meeting her eyes. She wasn't smirking this time. She looked dead serious, almost as if she believed the house itself had a will of its own. For the first time, I saw something behind her confidence, a flicker of something darker, maybe even fear. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but before I could, she turned and walked back inside, leaving me with her words hanging in the air. "Rules. The house won't let you stay." It sounded like nonsense, but it lingered in my head long after. Over the following weeks, the battle for control grew sharper. Every time I tried to move forward, measuring walls, planning repairs, even clearing the yard, she found a way to interfere. She would point out supposed violations, wave old papers at me, or warn me that I was putting the house at risk. It wasn't just about power anymore. It was about the strange way she tied herself to the house, almost as if she spoke for it. The neighbors I talked to seemed divided. Some rolled their eyes when her name came up, dismissing her as a busybody who had nothing better to do. Others lowered their voices and hinted that she knew more than she let on, that she had been part of the community since its earliest days and refused to let go. A few even warned me not to push too hard, as if challenging her would come with consequences I wasn't ready for. One night, I stayed late at the house, determined to make progress without her interference. I set up a lamp in the living room and spread out my tools. The silence of the mountain wrapped around me, broken only by the creaks of the old floorboards. At first, it felt good, peaceful, focused, but as the night wore on, I began to notice things that unsettled me. A door upstairs closing softly on its own. The faint sound of footsteps when I knew I was alone. The feeling of being watched, even in an empty room. I told myself it was just the old house shifting in the wind, or my nerves getting the best of me. But when I stepped outside for air, I caught sight of her standing at the edge of the trees, half hidden in the shadows, watching me. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there as if making sure I knew she was still there. When I finally called out, she turned and walked back into the woods without a word. That image burned into me. She wasn't just guarding the house during the day. She was watching it, maybe even watching me, at all hours. It felt less like an HOA dispute and more like I had stepped into some strange claim of ownership I didn't fully understand. As the days went on, I started noticing something else. The house itself seemed to resist my changes. Tools went missing, plans were interrupted. Small repairs I made seemed to undo themselves. Once, I painted a section of wall, only to return the next day and find the paint peeling away as if it had been there for decades. Every setback only made her words echo louder. "The house won't let you stay." I couldn't decide if she was playing tricks on me or if something larger was at work. Either way, the conflict had grown beyond me versus her. It was me against her, the so-called HOA, and the weight of the housey history all tangled together. I began to wonder if I had made a mistake buying this place. Maybe it wasn't just an abandoned mountain house. Maybe it was a house that people weren't supposed to keep, one that carried stories too heavy to shake off. And with every visit, every confrontation, every strange moment, I realized I wasn't just renovating a property. I was unraveling a mystery that had its grip on both the house and the people around it. And at the center of it all was her. Karen, calm, watchful, unyielding. A woman who believed the mountain belonged to her, who spoke as though the house itself had chosen sides. And whether I liked it or not, I was already deep in the middle of it, with no easy way out. Every time I returned to the mountain house, the weight of it grew heavier. It wasn't just a project anymore. It felt like I was stepping into a contest of wills, one that tightened around me a little more with each visit. The tension between me and Karen was no longer about rules or paperwork. It was about control. She had carved out a place for herself inside those walls, and the more I tried to push forward, the more she pushed back. One evening, I decided enough was enough. I packed my truck with everything I'd need to start a real renovation: boards, nails, paint, a new lock for the front door. My plan was simple: get there early, change the locks, and finally claim the house as mine. When I pulled into the driveway, the morning air was cold and sharp, the kind that bites at your lungs. The windows of the house were dark. For the first time since I'd met her, it looked like she wasn't inside. Relief washed over me as I carried my supplies up the steps. But the moment I slid the new lock into place, I heard the creak of a floorboard from upstairs. My stomach sank. I froze, hammer in hand, listening. Another creak followed, then the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps descending the staircase. She appeared a moment later, calm as ever, holding a book in her hands as if I'd interrupted a quiet morning routine. "You can't just lock me out," she said softly, almost amused. "This house doesn't work that way." Her voice carried a certainty that made my hands tremble. I wanted to argue, to tell her I had every right to secure my own home. But the way she stood there, steady, unshaken, made the words die in my throat. Instead, I backed away, promising myself I'd return when I had more leverage. But even as I drove down the mountain road, her words echoed in my head. "This house doesn't work that way." The conflict only grew sharper after that. I started noticing her influence creeping into everything. Mail addressed to residents of the HOA began showing up at my city apartment, as if she had somehow pulled my name into her web. Notices with rules, fines, even warnings. None of it made sense, yet the documents looked official enough to cause doubt. I spent hours calling offices, searching records, trying to untangle what was real from what was just her creation. One night, I decided to stay at the house again, determined to face whatever came. I set up camp in the living room, sleeping bag on the floor, tools within reach. The house was quiet at first, but as the hours passed, the silence twisted into something oppressive. The walls seemed to groan, the wind pressed against the windows, and every small noise felt amplified. Around midnight, I heard it, the sound of footsteps above me, pacing back and forth. I climbed the stairs slowly, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Each step creaked louder than the last. When I reached the top, the hallway stretched before me, lined with doors. One door at the far end was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. My chest tightened as I approached. I pushed the door open and froze. Inside was a room I hadn't seen before. The walls were covered in old photographs, newspaper clippings, and notes pinned up like some kind of map. Many of the photos were of the house itself, taken over decades. Some showed families smiling on the porch, others captured the house in disrepair. And mixed in among them were recent photos, pictures of me unloading my truck, walking up the porch, even standing inside. I staggered back, my heart pounding. She had been watching me from the very beginning, documenting every move. But what unsettled me most was one photo in particular, a faded picture of her, standing in front of the house years earlier, looking almost exactly the same as she did now. A floorboard creaked behind me, and I spun around. She was standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "You weren't supposed to see this yet," she said quietly. The way she said it made my skin crawl. Yet, as if there was a timeline she was following, a plan that hadn't reached its end. I demanded to know what all of this was, why she was collecting these photos, why she was here at all. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she spoke about the mountain, about how the house had chosen who could stay and who couldn't. She claimed that the families in those photos had ignored the rules, and that was why they never lasted. Her words blurred the line between superstition and obsession. But standing in that room surrounded by decades of history, I couldn't ignore the chill creeping down my spine. It was as if the house had a pulse, and she had tapped into it. I left that night shaken, but I knew I couldn't turn away. If anything, the discovery of that room pulled me deeper. I began researching every name I could find in the old clippings. Some families had indeed left suddenly, selling at a loss. Others had records that just stopped, as if they'd vanished. The pattern was unsettling, and no matter how I tried to explain it, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen believed every word she was saying. The more I investigated, the more the tension between us escalated. Each time I showed up at the house, she was there, waiting. Sometimes she spoke in riddles, other times she issued warnings. Once, I caught her locking one of the upstairs rooms, slipping a key into her pocket like it was the most natural thing in the world. Another time, I found her sitting on the porch at dawn, humming a tune I couldn't place, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if watching for something. The conflict had stopped being about ownership on paper. It had become a battle for the house itself. She acted like its guardian, bound to it in ways I couldn't understand, and I was the outsider forcing my way in. Every choice I made, every repair, every step forward, felt like a challenge to her authority. One stormy evening, I drove up the mountain determined to confront her once and for all. Rain pounded the windshield, and the narrow road twisted dangerously in the dark. By the time I reached the driveway, the house loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the lightning-lit sky. The windows glowed with a faint light, and I knew she was inside, waiting. As I climbed the porch steps, I could hear the wind howling through the trees, mixing with the creaks of the house. The door was unlocked, and when I pushed it open, I found her standing in the center of the living room. She didn't look surprised. She looked prepared. "You still don't understand," she said, her voice rising over the storm outside. "This house isn't just wood and nails. It remembers. It decides." The words hung in the air like a verdict. I felt the walls tighten around me, the storm rattling the windows, the floor beneath my feet groaning as if alive. My chest pounded as I realized this moment was different from all the others. This wasn't another standoff. This was the threshold of something bigger, something I couldn't walk away from anymore. And as the storm raged outside and her eyes locked on mine, I knew the conflict had reached its breaking point. Whatever was going to happen between me, her, and the mountain house, it was coming. And there was no turning back. The storm rattled the windows like the house itself was shivering. I stood frozen in the living room, rain pounding against the roof, and Karen staring at me as though she had been waiting for this very moment. Her words echoed louder than the thunder. "The house remembers. The house decides." At first, I wanted to dismiss it as nothing more than the ramblings of someone who had lost touch with reality. But the way the floor beneath us groaned, the way the lights flickered with each gust of wind, made it impossible to shake off. Something about the place felt alive. Before I could respond, she moved toward the fireplace, pulling a small wooden box from behind the logs. She placed it on the table and slid it across to me. "You should see this," she said, her voice low, steady, and almost daring. I hesitated but opened it. Inside were stacks of yellowed letters, brittle with age. They were written by previous owners of the house, each one describing strange experiences, doors that refused to stay closed, voices heard at night, dreams that repeated the same images over and over. And each letter ended the same way, with the owners giving up, leaving suddenly, abandoning everything they had invested. One letter in particular stood out. It was dated nearly 20 years ago, written by a family who had moved in with 2 children. The letter described how the kids had begun speaking of a woman who visited them at night, telling them the rules of the mountain. They claimed she warned them never to renovate certain parts of the house, especially the upstairs rooms. The parents wrote that they had tried to ignore it, but after weeks of sleepless nights and doors opening on their own, they left the house in the middle of winter, never to return. My hands trembled as I read, and I could feel Karen watching me, measuring my reaction. "You see?" she whispered. "It was never about you. It's the house. I'm the only one who understands it." Her calmness wasn't comforting. It was terrifying. She spoke like she wasn't protecting herself, but protecting it. And that was when the second twist revealed itself, one I hadn't expected. The letters weren't just records of fear. Mixed in were receipts, old maps, and documents showing that the land around the house once belonged to a single family, the same family name that appeared on the deed when I bought it. And right there, scribbled in the margins of one letter, was a note: "She never left. She's still here." I looked up at Karen, my chest tight. This is about you, isn't it? You were here with them." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "I've been here longer than you could imagine. I know every crack in these walls, every story in these floors. People come and go, but I stay, because I'm meant to." The storm outside seemed to swell, rattling the glass panes. My mind raced. Was she admitting she had lived here with all those families? Or was she claiming something even stranger, that she had always been here, bound to the house somehow? The thought made my skin crawl. The tension between us broke when a sudden crash echoed from upstairs. We both turned toward the staircase. For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease cross her face. Without a word, she grabbed a flashlight and started up the stairs. I followed, every step creaking under our weight, until we reached the locked room at the end of the hallway, the same one I'd seen her guard before. The door was ajar now, swaying gently as if someone had just gone inside. Karen froze, and for a split second, her calm facade slipped. She pushed the door open, and the beam of her flashlight swept across the room. Inside were more photographs, but these weren't of the house. They were of people, families, neighbors, children, all marked with dates underneath. Some of the photos were decades old, others recent, and in nearly every photo, standing somewhere in the background, was her. The realization struck me like lightning. She wasn't just tied to the house. She had been a constant figure in every story, every failed attempt to live here. She wasn't protecting the place. She was part of its history, woven into it like a shadow that never left. My breath caught, and I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The noise snapped her out of her trance, and she turned toward me with a look that was no longer patient or calm. It was sharp, almost defensive. "You don't understand," she said. "This isn't obsession. It's survival. If the house doesn't have someone, it takes them. It always takes them." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Was she saying she was chosen by the house, or that she had made some kind of bargain with it? I couldn't tell which answer was worse. The storm outside raged louder, and just then, the lights in the house flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. The flashlight beam shook in her hand as she scanned the room, her face pale and tense. For the first time, she didn't look like the one in control. She looked afraid. I backed toward the door, but she stepped in front of me, blocking the exit. "You can't just leave now," she hissed. "You've stirred it up. You've woken it." The floor groaned under our feet, louder than before, as though the house itself was shifting. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to push past her, to run out into the storm, and never look back, but something rooted me to the spot. The weight of the house, the years of stories, the photographs, all of it pressed in, demanding I face it. Then came another sound, faint but distinct, the sound of footsteps running across the roof. Both of us froze, staring upward. The storm howled, but the footsteps were clear, moving quickly back and forth above our heads. Karen's eyes widened, and she whispered, "It's already here." I didn't know what she meant, but the terror in her voice made my stomach drop. She wasn't playing a game anymore. She wasn't performing control. She was just as caught in this as I was. The storm reached its peak, shaking the windows so hard I thought they'd shatter. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the walls groaned as though straining to hold together. In that chaos, Karen turned back to me with a wild intensity. "If you stay, you'll see. You'll understand why no one ever lasts. But once you do, it's already too late." Her words weren't a threat, they were a warning. And in that moment, I realized the stakes had changed. This wasn't just about her squatting in my abandoned mountain house. This was about something larger, something buried in the foundation of the house itself, something that had driven away every family before me, something that had kept her tethered here for years, maybe decades. The storm raged on, the footsteps on the roof grew louder, and the locked room seemed to pulse with its own energy. Every instinct told me to leave, but the house had me in its grip now. The truth was closer than ever, and yet I felt the danger pressing in from every side. And as I stood there in the dark, face to face with Karen and the weight of everything she had revealed, I knew this was only the beginning of what the house still had left to show me. The storm outside howled like it was tearing the mountain apart. Every window rattled, and every board in the old house seemed ready to splinter. I could barely hear my own thoughts over the sound, but I could feel the weight of everything pressing down, the letters, the photographs, the footsteps on the roof, and most of all, Karen's words. She stood across from me in the locked room, her flashlight shaking in her hand, her eyes wild and unblinking. For the first time since I had met her, she looked less like a stubborn squatter and more like someone trapped in the same nightmare I had stepped into. The footsteps above us grew heavier, pounding now, like something was running in circles, testing the roof's strength. The ceiling creaked, dust falling around us. And then, silence. The kind of silence that feels alive. The kind that makes your skin crawl because you know it's only hiding what comes next. I swallowed hard, the air thick and stale, and whispered, "What does it want?" Karen's lips trembled before she answered. "It doesn't want anything. It just takes. That's all it's ever done. Families, neighbors, anyone who tries to stay. It doesn't let go until it has what it wants." Her words hung in the air, and then the house answered. A deep, thunderous crack split through the upstairs hallway, like a beam giving way. The sound jolted us both, and without thinking, I rushed past her, flashlight bouncing against the walls as I ran into the hall. Karen shouted my name, but I didn't stop. Something inside me needed to see for myself. I turned the corner and froze. The hallway walls, once plain wood, were now etched with deep, jagged scratches. Not random, but deliberate. They formed symbols, twisted lines that seemed to crawl across the surface, glowing faintly in the dark. The air buzzed with energy, the storm outside echoing through the floorboards. And at the far end of the hall, the shadows moved on their own, pulling toward the locked room like the house itself was breathing. Karen appeared beside me, panting, her flashlight beam sweeping over the walls. "You shouldn't have looked," she hissed. "It knows you now. You've seen it." Her words cut through me, but before I could respond, the shadows at the end of the hall shifted again, this time into a figure. It was vague at first, like smoke curling into shape, but as the lightning flashed through the windows, I could make out the outline of a woman. She stood there, motionless, her face obscured, but her presence filled the hallway. I could feel her eyes on me even though I couldn't see them. Karen dropped to her knees, whispering something I couldn't make out, like a prayer or a plea. The figure didn't move, but the air grew heavier, pressing on my chest until every breath burned. I tried to step back, but the floor beneath me groaned and shifted, like it was holding me in place. And then the figure spoke, not in words, but in a sound that echoed inside my head, vibrating through my bones. 1,000 whispers at once, overlapping, telling stories of every family who had lived here, every soul the house had claimed. I clutched my head, trying to shut it out, but it was like drowning in voices. Karen reached up and grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You have to choose," she cried. "Either you leave now and let it take me, or you stay and it takes us both. That's how it's always been. Someone has to stay." Her words hit me like a blow. This was the bargain she had been talking about all along. This was why she stayed, why she guarded the house. She had been the one chosen before, the one who remained while others fled. And now the house wanted me to make the same choice. Lightning struck nearby, shaking the walls, and the figure stepped closer. The symbols on the walls pulsed with light, and the photographs in the locked room rattled in their frames. I could feel the decision tightening around my throat. If I left, Karen would be consumed, and maybe the house would let me go. But if I stayed, I would be bound here too, trapped in the same endless cycle. I looked at Karen. Her eyes were filled with both fear and resignation, like she had known this moment would come. She whispered again, softer this time, "It has to be someone." The storm reached its peak, and in that instant, I made my choice. I pulled free from her grip and ran toward the figure at the end of the hall. The shadows swirled, the whispers screamed, and the air grew so heavy I thought my chest would collapse. But I didn't stop. I charged into the darkness, into the heart of whatever this thing was. The world exploded in light. The storm, the house, the whispers, all of it collided in a blinding flash. I felt weightless, like I was falling and floating at the same time. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the floor of the hallway. The storm had gone silent. The air was still, and the walls were bare again. No symbols, no scratches, just old wood. I pushed myself up, my head pounding, and looked around. Karen was gone. The house was empty, eerily quiet, as though nothing had ever happened. I stumbled through the rooms, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. The photographs were gone too, the locked room stripped bare. The letters, the box, everything had vanished. It was as if the house had swallowed it all. I stood in the center of the living room, my breath echoing in the silence. For a moment, I thought I had escaped, that maybe the house had chosen differently this time. But then I noticed the fireplace. Above it, where the mantel had always been empty, there was now a single framed photograph. I walked closer, my stomach turning. It was a picture of me, standing in the very hallway where I had confronted the figure. The date beneath it was today's. A chill ran through me as I realized what had happened. The house hadn't let me go. It had simply shifted the cycle. Karen was gone, but I was still here. I was the new shadow in its story, the next face in its collection. The storm outside had cleared, the night calm and still, but the weight in the air told me the truth. I wasn't free. I was bound now, just like she had been. And as I turned away from the fireplace, I thought I heard it again. The faint sound of footsteps above, circling on the roof, waiting for the next chapter to begin. I stood frozen in front of that photograph for longer than I can even measure. The edges of the frame seemed sharper than they should have been, the glass cleaner than the rest of the dusty house. My own face stared back at me, caught in mid-motion, like whoever, or whatever, took it wanted to remind me that I was now part of the story. For a long time, I couldn't move. My heart was pounding too hard, and my thoughts wouldn't line up. But slowly, the realization sank in. The house wasn't just abandoned. It wasn't just old wood and cracked stone. It was alive in its own way, and everyone who had ever set foot here became part of its pulse. I thought about Karen, for all her strangeness, her sharp words, and the way she had claimed authority over a home that wasn't hers. She had been stuck in this trap long before I ever showed up. She hadn't just been difficult. She had been desperate. The stories she told about neighbors disappearing and about bargains that had to be made, they weren't just theatrics. They were warnings. And now she was gone, her piece of the story swallowed whole by the house. I was left behind, standing in the same role she once had. But unlike her, I had something she didn't: the knowledge of how it happened. She had spent years trying to justify it with HOA rules, community watch talk, and endless excuses. I didn't need excuses. I had seen the shadows with my own eyes. I had felt the voices press against my skull. I knew exactly what this house did, and I wasn't about to pretend it was anything less than it was. I spent that night sitting in the living room with my flashlight on, waiting for the footsteps to return. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional groan of old wood. My eyelids grew heavy, and finally, just before dawn, I must have drifted off. When I woke, the sun was streaming through the cracked windows, casting long beams of light across the dusty floor. For the first time since I bought this place, the house felt still. Not safe exactly, but calm. I packed my things quickly, not daring to linger. As I shut the front door behind me, I turned for one last look at the house. From the outside, it was just as it had been, weathered, broken, slouching into the earth. But now I knew better. I knew the truth that no photo in a listing could show. And as I drove back down the mountain road, I kept glancing in my mirror, half expecting to see the silhouette of the house following me, its roofline sharp against the trees. The weeks that followed were strange. I tried to go back to normal life, back to the routines of work and everyday noise, but I couldn't shake the mountain house from my mind. I would wake in the middle of the night, hearing phantom footsteps above my ceiling. Once, I even swore I saw Karen's reflection in a window as I passed by, her face there for just a second before vanishing. I knew I had a choice. I could sell the place quietly, pass the curse to someone else, and pretend I had never been part of it. Or I could tear it down, rip out every board and stone until nothing remained but dirt and trees. But deep down, I knew neither option would work. The house wasn't tied to its wood or its nails. It was tied to the land, to the mountain itself. You could burn it down, and it would still rise again in some form. That's what it had done for generations, feeding off whoever stumbled across it. So instead, I decided on something different. I went back, not to live, not to rebuild, but to understand. Each trip, I carried a notebook, recording everything I saw, everything I heard, every strange shift in the air. I traced the names I had seen in those photographs and letters, piecing together the family trees of those who had vanished. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. The house didn't take randomly. It chose. It found people who were already carrying heavy burdens, already isolated, already vulnerable. People like Karen. People like me. It was both terrifying and oddly comforting to realize it wasn't just coincidence. There was a pattern, even if I couldn't fully see it yet. And maybe, just maybe, if I studied it enough, I could break it. One fall afternoon, months later, I stood again in the living room, notebook in hand. The photograph of me was still above the fireplace, its frame crooked now, like the house was tired of holding onto it. I stared at it for a long time before pulling it down. The glass cracked as I tucked it under my arm, but I didn't care. This time, I wasn't leaving it behind. When I drove away that evening, I didn't feel the same heaviness as before. The house still loomed in my rearview mirror, but it didn't feel like it had me in its grip anymore. For once, I felt like maybe I had taken something from it instead of the other way around. The truth is, I don't know if the cycle will ever really be broken. Maybe the house will stand long after I'm gone, waiting for the next soul to wander too close. Maybe the whispers will rise again. The shadows will stretch across the hall, and another photograph will appear above that fireplace. But if that day comes, at least they'll find my notes, my warnings, my evidence that it wasn't just in their heads. The mountain house taught me something I'll never forget. Not every fight is about tearing down walls or fixing roofs. Some fights are about holding onto yourself when everything around you is trying to take it away. And sometimes, the scariest battles aren't the ones with hammers and nails, but the ones fought in silence, against things you can't always see. So if you ever come across an abandoned place tucked away in the mountains, if you ever feel the pull to bring it back to life, pause for a moment and listen. Not with your ears, but with that quiet part of you that notices what others don't. Because sometimes, a house isn't just a house. Sometimes, it's a story already in motion, waiting for you to step inside. And if you do, remember my words. Some homes don't want saving. Some homes want you. That's the lesson I'll carry for the rest of my life. That house may still be standing, high in the pines, shadows waiting for the next visitor. But it doesn't own me anymore. The mountain keeps its secrets, but now, so do I.